them, the remainder of the participants, a few more moments to join. And we'll be starting momentarily. Meanwhile, I'm gonna push the buttons to share screen. There we go. Okay. If you can see harnessing humor, wave your hands. Good, excellent. So, hello friends. This is Jano and Pablo. You already heard from Jano if you were part of this event for the past hour or so. I'm Pablo Suarez. Like Jano, I combine a life as a researcher, mostly a mathematical modeler on climate and disasters. We're also humanitarian workers, predominantly with the Red Cross, Red Crescent family, but also with other teams. And we have evolved into designers of processes to facilitate learning and dialogue, to enable interaction in new ways.
Guess what? We've discovered that just talking about science puts about generally 50% of your audience to sleep. So we've been forced to explore better ways of communicating.
Indeed, research shows that showing research does not work. So we have to try new things and try to find what works. We're very grateful to the organizers of this event, the Blessed Unrest event on growing a future for life on Earth. And if we want to grow a future, we know that growing requires process, requires ingredients, requires certain modalities of timing and interaction. And this session will not be predominantly about the substance of climate and ecosystems. We have both worked extensively on that front, and we will sprinkle this time with the substance, but we will try to help you figure out how humor, this most unconventional tool, may be helpful for your work, for our work. So let's see if slides advance. Excellent. So task number 1 for you. You should be able to open the chat window in Zoom. Each one of you, please type one word that comes to mind when you think of humor. What do you think of when you think of humor? You cannot type the word humor. You have 20 seconds or so. Go. Okay. The words are coming in. All right, that's a lot of words. Yes. Okay, as you keep writing, I'm going to share with you a word cloud of the words that have consistently come to us when asking these questions in previous events. A dominant one is laughter, as is fun. When you think of humor, you notice that there are these manifestations of humor: laughter, smiling, the experience of fun. We also see things like comedy or jokes or stand-up, slapstick. These are things that are mechanisms to create humor. Now, very importantly, this workshop is not about jokes, okay? Jokes are statements intended to provoke laughter. And guess what? If you're trying to provoke laughter, especially when your audience is diverse, chances are that you'll either go too far and offend some in the audience, or you'll fall flat and come across as an idiot. This is not about provocation of laughter. This is about something else. Now, did any of you write or think about unrest? Because that's what brings us together, right? Did any of you think of death? It turns out that when I was facilitating this activity with the legendary cartoonist Bob Mankoff, who for 2 decades or so was editor for cartoons at the New Yorker magazine, he looked at me in the eyes, and when asked to say what he thinks of when thinking of humor, he said, death. And that was a surprise. And at first I thought he was like fussing with me. But let me show you one cartoon that explains, that illustrates how we feel in the humanitarian sector about climate. It may look like normal times, but only if you accept that the new normal is a lot like what we used to call bad. We know from system dynamics modeling and from life experience, all of you surely have noticed that change tends to be gradual until it is abrupt. And how big the change is depends on many, many factors. In this graph, if you allow me to deploy my mathematical brain, H represents hell. How horrible can things get once change becomes as intense as it's likely to become? The letter D stands for denial. Do we dare recognize that things are changing in a somewhat predictable way, and if we don't take certain actions, it will get ugly? This is a question mark. Like any question mark, it invites thinking about questions. In this case, what the hell were those people thinking? Why did they socially construct the conditions for risk? This cartoon paints a very accurate metaphor of where we are now. Of course, you could also project all sorts of things about ecosystems. What was going on upstream? Has there been deforestation? Has there been land use change? Has there been an invitation for investing in tourism infrastructure that augments the chances of people being in the wrong place at the wrong time? This is the caption of the original cartoon. We've got to talk. And indeed, we've got to talk. We are having these conversations because we have to talk. But what are we accomplishing when we talk? Let me show you this photo. This is the photo of one of many UN climate conferences I have been part of. Jan and I have attended a few. I have been to 16 consecutive COPs. Okay, since 2004 until the last one in Madrid, I've been to every single one. And in every single one, this is what it looks like. 10,000 people or more from about 200 countries spending 2 weeks trying to understand and address one of the most difficult and complex problems confronted by humanity, climate change. Question, how much humor do you notice in that event?
None.
Do you anticipate that this crowd will manage to find inspiration and determination to do what needs to be done? Let me show you that fellow over there. That is exactly how it feels when you're in that event and you notice how we're failing to accomplish what we need to accomplish. You may have heard from Greta Thunberg this statement: everywhere I have been, the situation is more or less the same. The inaction is the same. And we argue that the processes that are tasked with finding or creating solutions for the climate problem seem to be intentionally designed to inspire inaction. It turns out that the absence of humor correlates with the absence of action. This is dreadful. And these are two works of art that come to mind when thinking of what's going on. Frankenstein, because we've been creating monsters, whether it's the internal combustion engine or the greenhouse gas effect. And on the right, the Scream. It feels like screaming. If you understand what's going on, the natural reaction of any informed, sensitive human soul and brain is to feel like hell. Now, when talking about humor for climate and ecosystems, we're not proposing to add one moment of a light joke that can make people laugh in the face of darkness. This cartoon is not what we're proposing. We hate it when people deploy humor the wrong way. But we argue that there are things we can do to bring the right shade of experience that brings inspiration, that brings lightness, that makes us feel good, that activates the brain, that inspires a smile in the context of the darkness that we're experiencing. Some people argue that it is not acceptable to bring humor to something as dark and serious and sad as the climate problem, And there's historical evidence that that's not the way things work. Many of you will recognize the fellow in this photo, Mahatma Gandhi. He was a very serene and peaceful person, but he inspired a movement that made people beat the strongest empire at the time. And he was peaceful, but he was sharp. And he, turns out, used humor tactically and strategically. One of the examples, he was about to meet the King of England, and a journalist asked him, "Mr. Gandhi, do you think you're properly dressed to meet the king?" And his answer was, "Do not worry about my clothes. The king has enough clothes for the two of us." So in his answer, he used humor to talk about injustice in the distribution of resources. Now, if he had said, "The king has too many dresses and many Indians do not have, even though we have the cotton," it wouldn't have had the same effect. You can read throughout his tactical and strategic use of humor, and it's really, really inspiring. One of his students, Martin Luther King, also learned the necessity and the value of humor and laughter. If technology works, I'm going to play a little clip of Martin Luther King being interviewed. Many of you will recognize the interviewer. Let me know, do this if you hear, otherwise I will move on without the audio.
Perhaps you can ask this now when it comes to scriptures in a moment. This matter
Can you hear?
of humor through adversity. I know a close friend of yours is Dr. Reverend Ralph Abernathy, who I think is one of the funniest and very wonderful speakers I've heard for years.
Yes. Well, I think you've got to have the ability to engage in creative laughter in order to live amid difficulties and tension. If you can't laugh in life, you're a very miserable human being. And I think a great deal of truth often comes through laughter. And some people have developed the talent to get this truth over to many people by laughing the truth into them and out of them. So that I think humor is most important in getting at truth and getting people to understand, and often to rise above the despair which can surround them.
So I want to highlight a few things from here. One is that he doesn't say some people are born with the ability to create humor. He refers to developing the talent. It turns out that humor as a tactical tool for things that are serious, such as addressing racism or addressing the causes and consequences of a changing climate, you can learn how to use it. If you don't want to become a stand-up comedian, don't do it. Just invite people who know how to do it, or look at existing off-the-shelf mechanisms for humor, just like you don't need to be born a chef, but you can read from Julia Child or your favorite, your grandma, to learn how to make things happen. So these are the words that you and most of us human beings associate with humor: laughter, fun, jokes, etc. Now, we have been interacting with professional humor designers, cartoonists, stand-up comedians, writers of TV shows and the like. And when they think of humor, they think of the following words: conflict, tension, ambiguity, contradiction, absurdity, risk, death. Now, if you look at these words, you can recognize our work life and our challenges. The reason why we have a problem is that ecosystems are valuable, but they are not valued. The reason why we have to get stuff done is because other people argue for one thing, but do the other thing. What often happens is that something is unacceptable yet accepted, and that collision is fertile ground for humorists to shed light on what is unacceptable yet accepted. And that's what we can do when we notice that something that exists shouldn't exist, or the other way around. So we're going to give you a task, which is each of you has had a life of engagement in the spectrum of things that matter to climate ecosystems and trying to get good things to happen. Surely, in your confrontation of unrest, whether at the deep personal level, in conversation with your brother-in-law, or in dealing with national or global politics, you have confronted a state of unrest. Unrest not meant only like, you know, a protest, but a discomfort, something that is not at peace. Can you find instances where you experienced something that could be called humor? A smile, a laugh, a recognition of wit, either because of something someone said, because of something that you said, or some other manifestation. Have a thought, look for those things, and when you find something, type them as briefly as you can, because otherwise people won't read them. And let's give this task 3 to 5 minutes. It's going to be introspection. Think of the past, moments of collision, unrest, tension, conflict. When did humor happen? Share that. Good luck. It's not easy. When did you experience humor or smile or fun in a tough context? Ideally related to climate or ecosystems, but could also be about something else like personal life or beyond. You can also refer to things you noticed, even in movies or things outside of your personal experience. We're going to give you 2 more minutes. Yes. Interesting. Breaking the tension.
You want me to do it on that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're seeing some some great things. We're seeing the unexpected, breaking tension, more unexpected or ironic. There's also the kind of joining in, the sister writing Stick 'em Up, including each other in the humor of the situation. The reveal can often be humorous.
Smile and acknowledge. I like that.
Yes, yeah. Smile and acknowledge.
It's easier to acknowledge after a smile.
And this, I love calling out Abraham Lincoln as one of the funniest presidents. I would not share that view, but I remember when I was a grad student, a Chinese student who actually came from China's Foreign Affairs Ministry shared with me that he thought Mao Zedong had a marvelous sense of humor.
Yeah, no, Mao didn't, but there are whole books on Abraham Lincoln's humor, and I really recommend, Pablo, that you use him as an example.
Yeah.
And they're the most serious subjects. They're hilarious.
Exactly. And there's a reason why they, the leaders of the movements that attempted to create change in a context of injustice or unfair distribution of goodness, they knew that humor could dissolve barriers. They knew that humor could accomplish things that wouldn't be easily accomplished otherwise. So feel free to keep typing. I'm going to share with you some of the examples of our work in this space. The photo you see on the screen is from a workshop in Southern Africa in the Zambezi River floodplain with a community of subsistence farmers.
In Namibia.
They are on very fertile soil, so most of the time it's good, but by definition a floodplain can flood. And when it happens, they can be caught by surprise. If you're a humanitarian worker who brings science to places that are not familiar with satellite mathematical models of forecasting and so on, and you tell them a flood is coming, start running, it's like someone telling you Godzilla is coming, start running. You're gonna say, who are you? What is a Godzilla? How do you know? And why should I do as you say? So what we did was to create a playful experience where the local community came up with ideas on what to do in case of too much water. And through gameplay, rolling dice and the like, they had to actually physically carry out the activities in a very short time. In this photo, you see the moment where they had to start running to, for example, prepare the boat to put the children on the boat.
So it's two teams and they're trying to accomplish the most flood preparedness as possible, competing with each other.
Now, you see that the bodies have the language of action, but if you look at the faces, there's radiant smiles happening. And research shows that when you're having a good time, when humor happens, your mechanisms, your neurochemical mechanisms that create memories, they create long-lasting memories that are easier to capture, easier to revisit. We know also that humor, the experience of humor, engenders trust. When you laugh, you bond. And guess what? We are not seeing enough change because there isn't enough trust. Change happens at the speed of trust, and humor can help.
So they remember this experience. Their memory is heightened because they enjoyed it so much, but they enjoyed it together. So their memory is actually a shared understanding of what were those flood protection measures that they agreed and planned together, that they had that really enjoyable game experience competing with their colleagues to try to test this new plan that they had come up with in the context of a game.
A second very different example is from about 8 years ago when I was invited to be one of a ton of presenters inside the White House. Most of my predecessors had 5 minutes of PowerPoint. Hello, my name is so-and-so from organization this and that, and there used to be a problem, and my organization came up with a solution. Now everything is better. Give us some money. Thank you. Goodbye. Next presenter, the same. Next presenter, the same. Coffee break. Next presenter, hello, I'm so-and-so from this and that. We are awesome. Give me money. Next presenter, then lunch break, then another presenter, then me. I knew I would have a completely brain-dead crowd. So when it was my turn, I said, hello, my name is Pablo from the Red Cross, and this is not a Frisbee, it is a hurricane. If it hits you in the chest, you're in trouble. Everyone stand up. People were like, what? So I won't go into the details, but in essence, I had some dice. I threw the Frisbee, it hit people in the chest. They could sit down to avoid it. But if you evacuate and it doesn't hit you, it's like someone could steal your refrigerator because you evacuated in vain. Look at the face of my fellow presenter right next to me. She, like everyone else, 130 people in the room, were having a blast. And eventually they figured out what was going on. When I threw the dice, a double 1 is over here, a double 6 is over there. That determined where I threw the Frisbee. They got it. People over there, when I rolled an 8, sat down, and I threw the Frisbee. It flew above their heads, and they went like, yay! And when laughter and joy subsided, I said, congratulations, you just figured out how to link science with action. Now think of Hurricane Katrina. We can do better. My team can help you do better. My name is Pablo. Here's my contact info. Thank you. Goodbye. And that bonding moment between them and the context created much more opportunity for follow-up.
And it was pretty funny going through White House security when they pulled out the foam Frisbee.
I could tell you longer stories about that. But one message to convey is that humor can help you make what is strange familiar, such as science leading to better actions, or what is familiar strange, such as we know we can do something and we don't do it. Isn't that strange? And this, of course, can apply to a range of threats, not limited to climate. Third example, with my colleague Andrew, we were training a team of NASA for 4 days, and they specialize in the interface between environment and disaster. So satellite images of deforestation, landslides, coastal issues, and so on. And the setup for the first of 4 days was a local venue that had the vibe of a stand-up comedy club. So we took advantage of that, and we established an activity whereby each NASA team presented their tool, what could be done about it, etc. And everyone else was tasked to come up with 2 headlines. One, assuming that something awesome had happened because of that NASA tool, and a second one that something bad had happened because of the NASA tool. Guess what? When they shared headlines about the misunderstanding or the bad use or the inappropriate estimation or whatever, everyone laughed, but the presenters recognized that something could go wrong, and they went back to their tools and they improved what to do with them, which would have been very different if there had been no humor. If it had been Q&A and someone said, have you considered the possibility that because of the delta pi, you could, humor helps. It does help convey things that are otherwise hard to convey. I had a chance to give a TED talk about humor and risk, a TEDx talk. And in the training materials, we were told by the organizers, what you see in the bottom, audiences who laugh with you quickly come to like you. And if people like you, they're much readier to take seriously what you have to say. That's the key. If you want serious results, humor can help. Fun is functional. Fun can help you accomplish what you want to accomplish. 3 cartoons from Bob Mankoff. Important looking person? No, Thursday won't work. How about never? Is never good for you? This is the most downloaded cartoon from the New Yorker magazine. It's not exactly funny, like laughter in bursting, but it's a universal explanatory theory as to why certain things are not happening. Someone doesn't want to make that happen. How do we deal with that? This cartoon and all the other ones we're using with license from cartooncollections.com. I'll speak more to that later. This one is pretty relevant for your line of work, yes? What is a just allocation of ecosystem health or ecosystem restoration? Well, depends on where you stand in the food chain, right? Some may see what's going on as perfectly just. I'm the big fish, I'll eat what I want. And others may think there's no justice. How can we use humor to shed light on where people see what? What does the world look like? In order to accomplish what we need to accomplish, we need to know what people are thinking. And you may think that they're having deep thoughts, but maybe they're thinking about short-term gains. And this one really matters to us because we need to recognize what is really the incentive structure of our counterparts, our partners, our opponents, and people who are just indifferent, but can be swayed one way or another. Cartooncollections.com, founded by Bob Mankoff, has a wealth of cartoons, sometimes too many, but if you're looking for something to say, maybe you will find something useful there. if you want to grow a future, the act of growing requires nutrients, including some that we haven't thought of. I would argue that cartoons and humor can be one of those nutrients. So how are we doing with time? Maybe we can invite you to share in the Zoom chat one experience. Don't do it yet, because I will show you one cartoon before you do. But you will type one experience where you were trying to accomplish something good and there was no humor in the air and not much happened. Try to see if you can identify an instance inspired by the following cartoon. Have you ever found yourself honking and complaining that there was no unlocking of the system? If so, type something in the chat. What was an experience that was humorless and led to no good result? I see what you're writing. Yeah. And notice that some of what you're writing led to a humorless experience for you, but to a lot of fodder for humor creation by others. That's an interesting one, the difference between knowing and believing. Politics often gets in between those two sets of systems, what I care for and what is fact. And indeed, politics has become more and more a system that determines which is the thing that matters. And of course, ecosystem restoration has not been doing well in that space. Let's give you another 30 seconds. I hear typing going on. Yeah, labels make a difference. Yeah, angry groups, even if they're small, they can really derail. And as was written before by one of you, instances of tension are particularly suitable for trying loving, intelligent humor to diffuse tension. You have to be very careful because it can backfire when used the wrong way. So I'm going to move on, just sharing with you some examples of how we have used humor in the serious world. Humor enables breakthroughs. This is the biggest message for you. If you're stuck and you keep throwing the same message and nothing happens, humor can help you help others see from a different angle, consider different ideas, come up with new reflections. There was a World Bank event to be organized about the matter of what they call government accountability, which is, if you want, code for corruption or bad decisions. And if you're the one giving the money and money doesn't go all of it where it should go, and you invite a Minister of Finance of Cambodia or Minister of Infrastructure of Burkina Faso or Ministry of Planning of Guatemala, and you want to have a conversation about corruption, guess what will happen? The guests, the ministers will say, first, there's no corruption in my country. Second, it wasn't me. And third, who do you think you are asking me to come talk about corruption? What will the newspapers say in my country? So they show up either like this or like that. How do you create an atmosphere for collaboration? The organizers didn't know what to do. They invited a conversation, and Bob Mankoff and I proposed to do something unconventional. We posted cartoons on the wall, and when 100+ people arrived to the event, the person who said hello and welcome, we're going to have this event, we're going to start something unconventional. Stand up, go out, look at those cartoons on the wall and annotate, write something, a question, an anecdote, a comment, an alternative caption. And people did, and in noticing what was there, they smiled or laughed, and they recognized the reality that was no longer deniable. You can see these two faces. One is intense observation, and the other is just plain laughter. And that changed the atmosphere of the event. We have come up with the idea of cartoonathons. What is a cartoonathon? It's like a hackathon for humor making. We created this through a joint endeavor of the World Bank. Jano and I both consult frequently for the World Bank group, and humorists from cartoon collections. What a cartoonathon does is to help us confront our contradictions, incongruities, tensions, absurdities through a way of having fun that is serious. We have already deployed it with the Red Cross family, with the university systems, with BMW foundations, and more is coming. If you're interested, look us up, reach out, we can try to help. The recent one with the government of Afghanistan about funding for disasters. In Afghanistan, there are people who die because of bullets and violence and bombs, but over the past few years, more people have died because of floods and droughts than because of violence and war. This is not only climate change, it's also a manifestation of a government that is not strong enough. But we know that we have to do things to help the Afghan people. And unfortunately, it's not easy to get stuff done, especially when moving money can be so technically complex and full of contracts with footnotes.
For example, during this event, there was still complete indecisiveness as to who was actually president of Afghanistan. There were two candidates claiming to have won the election and more or less administering jointly.
So you can imagine, in a real world full of tension and contradiction, where money is needed to take action on climate risks and other forms of disasters, what do you do? How do you enable good conversations? Well, the World Bank and the government of Afghanistan agreed to engage us for a 2-day event that included a total of 3 hours of humor-infused interaction. It looked like this.
The backstory is they would try anything.
So you can see on the left, there's like a Zoom-like platform convened by cartoon collections that brought together government of Afghanistan, almost a dozen people, plus about 6 people from the World Bank, plus 4 cartoonists in New York City and Washington, engaging in real time. So we started with cartoons on the wall. They stood up and annotated them. Then the cartoonists read those annotations and became familiar with the issues. Then they had small group discussions. The person on the right is Madam Sarabi, Deputy Minister of Finance. Look at her smile. Yes? She was just confronting that same cartoon, and in that cartoon, I don't know if she wrote it or someone else wrote it, but there was this: let's create another project or program like the one we created years ago and which also failed. What are the chances of that level of candor in the presence of Deputy Minister?
Either she or her assistant wrote that.
There was also this other cartoon, the invention of the wheel comes downfield, and the person says, my next big project is brakes. Things can go wrong. One of the annotations was, let's not put ourselves in danger, which in Afghanistan, you know what it means. If you're government, you can be killed just because of that. But there was another statement that said, get out, because there's stuff happening out in the field where we need to be. So as a result of the group discussion, one of the insights was, we need World Bank money to fund Afghan government to go out to the field where disasters happen.
So it was actually a reflection on the meeting itself. That who are these people, these so-called, experts and government advisors? What do they actually know about what's going on in the field?
So when they agreed, World Bank plus government of Afghanistan, that indeed it was needed to fund the presence of government out in the field where droughts and floods happen, one of the 4 humorists, Kendra Allenby, published in the New Yorker magazine, she came up with this idea for a cartoon. a bureaucrat crouching over a desk, piles of paper. We put him in the field, but it didn't help.
They loved it.
Not only they loved it, but people in the room, Afghan government plus World Bank, were invited to have a conversation about it and to improve the cartoon. So they said, well, you could make the mountains more Afghan-like. You could make the desk bigger and more full of paper. The field could be actually a crop field where crops are failing because of the drought, like the one we just had. And they came up with ideas on how to use the cartoon in their future meetings and workshops. And this is the final version.
So Kendra, in real time, took all of their suggestions on board and refined her drawing.
And the same was true of multiple cartoonists and multiple cartoons. So what we do in this process, which could be helpful to you and your various initiatives, is that first there's a group of people who have something interesting to discuss, while cartoon artists are listening and noticing those tensions, conflicts, contradictions, ambiguities, etc. Then drafts are created in real time, shared by the cartoonist and discussed by participants, who then come up with improvements not only for making the cartoon better and more useful, but also on how to change the conversation.
So we're introducing a methodology. We're experimenting, but we wanted to see if we could harness humor, put it to work. And probably the best comment that we heard coming out of this first high-level event was one of the Afghan government participants said, I want to run all my workshops like this.
It changes the nature of the conversation. Now, here's another one of those cartoons from the same day. I'll let you study it at your own tempo. Right now, we have a global pandemic that is coexisting with climate problems, with problematic economies, in some cases, like in Afghanistan, with conflict. And those stressors, those shocks are creating synergies, dreadful synergies that look like they are collaborating with each other. Just now, Jano was in a conversation with colleagues from the Caribbean to discuss hurricane preparedness, because guess what? If you all evacuate to a safe shelter, you accelerate the spread of coronavirus. How do you make decisions, especially when the need to collaborate across entities, across government, NGO, civil society, experts, and so on, is not so easy. It's hard to collaborate.
Or in Haiti, where the pandemic hit, but up until that moment, every week thousands of people had been taking to the streets protesting against the government, including the police protesting against the violence that the government said they were putting more police on to control.
So if we substitute the orange line for ecosystem degradation, this brings us to where we are now. There has been ecosystem degradation right now because of the unfortunate loss of life and the need to suppress some of the economic activity. There is better air quality, there is regrowth of certain plants and creatures in certain places, but we know that ecosystem degradation will continue to rise unless you do something differently. How can we improve the profile of future ecosystems so that they are better for nature in itself, for the people who live near them, and for the global climate at large? So these are some of the cartoons you saw today. Here's an invitation for you. We have 10 minutes or so left. Type any questions in the chat that you may have for us, and have ideas about, can humor help you awaken awareness among your peers or partners or opponents? Can humor help challenge you and your own team on thinking differently? Can humor enable collaboration with others? Let's give you 3 minutes or so to type in the chat while you reflect, and then John and I will answer any questions, and then more stuff can happen after the official end. Over to you. I'm going to get me a glass of water meanwhile. So if you have any questions, this is the time to type and ask. If you have any insights or ideas, you can also do so. Let's start by typing so everyone has a chance. And then we do a mini debriefing. Let's give 2 more minutes. So while you finish typing your questions, this is the last slide I wanted to share. Very often we give answers or we give orders, and oftentimes not much happens. It's like honking again. The reason why humor can help nurture the right kind of blessed unrest is that humor creators start by creating confusion intentionally. They make you look at the cartoon or the thing in front of you and go like, huh? What is this thing? What is going on? Then it may trigger just plain out laughter, haha, or a smile or some manifestation of humor. But if it's well designed, then it leads to some kind of aha, I get it. This is like a mirror. That is about us. And it enables a new way of thinking, a new way of discussing, a new way of doing. There's the contact info for us, email and Twitter handle thing. If we no promises, because we're pretty tied up with our humanitarian work, but we'd be delighted to hear from you. My quick 2 answers of the many interesting questions and ideas that came up. One in terms of how about other art forms beyond humor? Yes, absolutely. We have been working with hip hop artists. I despise hip hop as an art form, but turns out many people love it, and many hip hop artists are super talented. And we did something with the UN system, including the President of the General Assembly and hip hop improvisers. We're working with satellite artists. We're working with animation folks. We're working with local artists, and we're expanding our range to create an interaction between serious people and those who are creative forces who can create a new form of challenge. The other thing I wanted to say in terms of follow-up, there are many things you can do to learn more. As mentioned, there's a TED Talk. You can search for Pablo Suarez TEDx Humor. There's a book that is very accessible and very useful, which is called Humor That Works by Drew Tarvin, which gives ideas on how to turn humor into a tool. It's mostly for business. It pitches itself as a business book, but it can accomplish a lot. And my biggest advice to you is, as implied by one of you in the comments, discovering humor in a situation can be easier than trying to invent humor. Just looking at the word as a cartoonist to notice the contradiction, the tension, the ambiguity, the conflict, and making any reflection about it, it can be helpful to you. Jano is typing, but I'll invite her to join. Any additional comments? 5 minutes left.
I was just typing in some additional sort of methods that we've tried it's not that we have one method of harnessing humor. So I'm sure that each of you have experienced the agony of listening to reporting back on breakout sessions where someone hogs the mic, or they decide to pass it around so that everybody at the table gets to talk and repeat the same thing over and over. And one of the things that's helped us a lot is we actually have joined up with a network called the Applied Improv Network. And what we get from that are techniques, tools. You know, we all have different talents and different comfort zones with, you know, what we're willing to try. But I guess what, you know, what we'd like you to come away with is not to think that you have to be some sort of an expert to do this, that there are many ways that you can bring humor to bear tactically to put that, you know, that incredible wisdom from Martin Luther King to work for you and for the planet.
So I'm typing the last thing, and those are some available resources for you. We are very, very grateful for the opportunity to join you. We wish you all the best in whatever awaits you, which is a lot. And remember, hopefully from now onwards, that humor can not only bring light to you in times of darkness, but that light can become illumination. It can shed light on things that shouldn't be but are. Humor is about the clash between what is and what could be. And humor invites us to think more about why is it this way? Why couldn't it be another way?
And there are different kinds of humor. So you can make fun of something. You can make people the brunt of humor, and that is very much not the kind of humor that we're interested in. We're interested in humor which applies the improv guidance of love yourself, love your audience, and find the system funny. Humor can be very inclusive, and that's the kind of humor that we encourage you to explore.
So thanks again.
Oh, this is terrific. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. We are really happy that you were able to join us.
Oh, it's wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you.